After spending 12 long years on Oklahoma's death row, Marilyn Kay Plantz, a seemingly ordinary church-going mother, was executed by lethal injection. But to truly grasp how a suburban mom with 2 young children became one of the most notorious female murderers in state history, we have to rewind to a steamy summer morning in 1988 when a burned-out pickup truck was discovered. In a desolate stretch of northeast Oklahoma City, it belonged to James Earl Plantz, a 33-year-old husband and father who had vanished the night before. On the evening of August 25th, James had kissed his wife goodbye and headed off for his graveyard shift at the Daily Oklahoman, just like any other night. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his wife had already sentenced him to death. At home, Marilyn tucked their 2 kids, 9-year-old Trina and 7-year-old Christopher, into bed. The house was quiet, peaceful, normal. Once he did, they returned to the house, but that peace was a mask. Hours earlier, Marilyn had picked up her 17-year-old lover, William Clifford Bryson, and his friend, Clinton McKim. The trio spent the night driving aimlessly through town, but everything was wrong. Buying crack cocaine, drinking beer, and waiting for James to leave. As the men smoked and drank in the front room, Marilyn quietly played the part of mother until 10:30 p.m. When she went to bed like nothing was wrong. Marilyn had met Clifford sometime in late 1987 or early 1988. He was barely more than a boy Savantine, aimless and vulnerable. She was nearly twice his age, married with 2 kids, and ready to burn her life to the ground. Their relationship quickly turned physical. While James worked overtime trying to keep the lights on, Marilyn was letting Clifford take over his home. She gave him money, access to her car, and a free pass to live like the king of her castle. What started as an illicit fling spiraled into something darker, deadly even. Marilyn began plotting James's murder, and Clifford, kill him, infatuated and under her spell, was ready to play executioner. Marilyn claimed James was abusive, that she was desperate to escape, but a simple divorce wouldn't satisfy her. What she wanted, what she needed, was James's $300,000 life insurance policy, and there was only one way to get it. The murder wasn't impulsive, it was methodically planned over months. First, Marilyn handed Clifford a gun and told him to do it. He pawned it for drug money instead. Then came the idea of an ambush inside the home, but James never took the bait. Marilyn later pitched a fishing trip where the men could push him overboard and let him drown. That plan, too, collapsed. But she didn't give up. At 4 a.m., she pushed James harder, walked back into his home. Finally, arms full of groceries, took shape, humming a tune oblivious to the trap waiting for him. As he stepped into the kitchen, Clifford Bryson attacked, slamming a baseball bat into the back of his head. James collapsed, dazed and bleeding, crying out for the one person he thought he could trust, his wife. But Marilyn never came to help, because she was part of the ambush. Marilyn didn't rush to help. She didn't scream. But she never came. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she stayed in the bedroom, silent, waiting while her husband was being bludgeoned just feet away. When James collapsed, barely conscious, bleeding from the head, Clinton McKimball joined Clifford in the assault. They kept swinging until he dropped to the floor. But James wasn't dead, not yet. Gasping, barely holding on, he was still alive when they dragged his limp, battered body outside and shoved him into the bed of his own pickup truck. Only then did Marilyn emerge. She stepped out into the night, looked down at the man she had once vowed to love and protect, and coldly assessed the scene. "It's too messy," she said flatly, staring at the blood pouring from his fractured skull. His head's busted open. "It's not going to look like an accident. Burn him." Those were her words. Calm / detached, final. And they obeyed. Clifford and Clinton drove the truck to a remote stretch of road in northeast Oklahoma City. In a twisted act of staging, they pulled James's barely conscious body into the cab and propped him behind the steering wheel as if he had simply nodded off. Then they tried to ignite the scene. Clinton stuffed a rag into the gas tank and lit it, but it fizzled. So Clifford took a gas can, doused the interior and exterior, and struck a match. The fire caught instantly. As the flames engulfed the truck, the 2 teens backed away, then turned to leave, but not before they saw something that would haunt them forever. Through the dancing inferno, James Earl Plantz was moving. He was still alive, struggling, trying to sit up, burning alive. Back at the house, Marilyn had already begun the next phase. She was scrubbing the blood from the floor. "No traces," she said. "No mistakes." cleaning up the evidence like she was washing away spilled juice. When the boys returned, she told them to strip off their blood-soaked clothes and change into her husband's. Coldly efficient. She stuffed the dirty clothes into a sack, and then they made their way to a friend's house, instructed them to dump it far from her home. But their night wasn't over. Still wired from the adrenaline and drugs, they told the story like it was a joke. Clifford and Clinton casually stopped at a convenience store. They used James's money to buy sandwiches and drinks like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just murdered a man in cold blood. Michael Kendrick's place, unshaken. She told him she had already bought a new rug to replace the blood-soaked one. They spoke casually, a twisted adventure. Clifford even laughed when he mentioned that Marilyn's children heard too. Innocent kids had been asleep, just a few feet away, while their father was beaten within an inch of his life. Then, right in front of Michael, Clifford picked up the phone and called Marilyn. She was calm, like two people talking about a trip to the store. And before hanging up, Clifford reminded her of the one truth tried to live, but dental records would confirm what Marilyn already knew. But he didn't make it. They both now lived by. They had to stay close. They were bound now by blood, by fire, by murder. By dawn, what began as an ordinary night had become a nightmare. At 5:15 a.m., firefighters arrived at the scene. The truck was charred beyond recognition, smoke still curling into the morning sky. The driver's door hung wide open. Slumped behind the wheel was a man's blackened body. One foot dangled out the side flat against the pavement, like he had tried to crawl out. The fire had erased almost everything: his face, his features, his identity. The body belonged to James Earl Plantz. The fire was supposed to erase everything. It didn't. By the time sun fully rose over Oklahoma City, the crime scene was already raising questions. The fire investigators noted that the blaze looked intentional. Accelerants had clearly been used, and the remains of a melted gas can told its own story. But what truly unsettled them was the position of James's body, slumped behind the wheel, foot on the pavement, arms twisted unnaturally. He didn't look like a man who died in an accident. He looked like someone who tried to escape. By mid-morning, police knocked on Marilyn's door. She answered calmly, even smiled a little. When asked about her husband, she said she didn't know where he was, that he had gone to work the night before and never came home. She played the grieving wife, but something about her was ... off, too rehearsed, too cold. Detectives noticed the rug was brand new. The floor beneath it had been recently scrubbed clean. The scent of bleach still lingered in the air. Her story didn't match the timeline. And worse, she kept glancing at the kids, as if she were afraid of what they might say. Later that day, police brought in Marilyn for more questioning. Meanwhile, a patrol officer stopped by Michael Kendrick's house to follow up on a tip. There, Michael hesitated, then cracked. He couldn't hold the weight of what he knew. He told them everything. The arrests, a pact shattered. Within 48 hours, Clifford Bryson and Clinton McKimball were in custody. Clifford folded almost immediately, high, exhausted, and scared. He confessed to everything: the affair, the bat, the truck, the fire, and Marilyn's role in orchestrating it all. He said she had been the brains behind it from the start, and they had done it for the money. She had promised him a better life, a share of the $300,000 life insurance payout. Clinton, too, confessed. His account matched Clifford's down to the details. Marilyn waiting in the bedroom, telling them to burn him. Scrubbing the floor, giving instructions on what to destroy. Marilyn was arrested the same day. She denied everything, claimed the boys had acted on their own, that she was manipulated, that she never meant for James to die. But her lies couldn't compete with the evidence piling up. The blood residue in the house, the timeline of phone records, her own bank withdrawals the night of the murder, and the matching testimonies from the two teens she thought she controlled. The mask of the grieving widow was gone. The trial, justice unfolds. In 1989, Marilyn Kay Plantz stood trial for the murder of her husband. The courtroom was packed. Some came for justice, others came for answers. What they got was a disturbing glimpse into the mind of a woman who had weaponized seduction, manipulation, and maternal calm to orchestrate a cold-blooded execution. The prosecution painted a damning picture. A woman who wanted out of a marriage, not to escape abuse but to cash in. They described the plot as deliberate, cruel, and driven by greed. A woman who let her children sleep in the same house where their father was beaten half to death. A woman who heard his cries for help and never came. The defense tried to argue coercion, that Marilyn was abused, that she was under Clifford's influence. But the timeline told a different story. Marilyn had been the one pulling the strings, over months, not days. It took the jury just a few hours to deliver the verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. And the sentence, death. Clifford Bryson received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Clinton McKimball was given life as well, in a separate trial. Both men were teenagers when they were arrested. Only Marilyn faced execution. The final year's countdown to death. Marilyn spent the next 12 years on Oklahoma's death row. Behind bars, she maintained a carefully controlled image, writing letters, attending Bible studies, even gaining sympathy from certain prison reform activists. But the facts of her case remained unchanged. Her role was not minor. She hadn't been coerced. She had coordinated a brutal, heartless murder and tried to erase the evidence with fire. Over the years, appeals were filed and denied. As her execution date approached, media attention rose. Some questioned whether a mother of two should be put to death. Others asked, where was that concern when James was being murdered in front of his own children? In the end, the court stood firm. Execution, the end of the line. On May 1, 2001, Marilyn Kay Plantz walked into the execution chamber at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She was 40 years old. Her final words were barely above a whisper. She apologized, not directly to James's family, but in general. A quiet, vague expression of remorse. No mention of the children who had to grow up, knowing what their mother had done. No mention of James. At 9:15 p.m., the drugs entered her system. Within minutes, Marilyn was pronounced dead. She became one of the very few women executed in the United States in modern times. A mother, a wife, a killer. Epilogue. A house of silence. In the aftermath, Trainer and Christopher were left without both parents. One dead, one executed. Their childhood home, once filled with quiet nights and bedtime stories, was forever marked by violence, betrayal, and blood. What Marilyn had destroyed wasn't just a life, it was a family. And for those who remember that summer morning in 1988, one image will never leave them. A charred pickup on the side of a dirt road, and a man who tried to crawl out, but never made it.